Hello Irlandia, the Polish show on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Join Hello Irlandia every Thursday at 8:30 to listen to the best of Polish music and community stories in Polish. Hello Irlandia w 103 i 2 Dublin City FM. Nasz głos na Zielonej Wyspie.
Hi, it's Aga Qubica broadcasting for Hello Irlandia. Welcome to another edition of the latest news from the US and the world. Recently, our weekly program hosted by Dublin City FM has been censored. The reason was an interview conducted by our editorial colleague with healthfreedomireland.com, an organization which makes people aware of the threats caused by vaccines in general. This interview was pulled from the radio at the last minute, and consecutively our editorial office received an information that from now on we will be airing our radio programs in Polish or about Poland exclusively. Of course, we anticipated that this day would come, and we were right. Therefore, I am starting a series of periodical summaries of events from the US and the world in Polish, which will air on the radio. And I will continue with my news in English on my private channel, Aga Qubica Media, which you can find on YouTube and BitChute. See the links below. Let me start with the most famous case of the last few weeks, namely that of the former National Security Advisor at the office of the current US President Donald J. Trump. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn has served in American intelligence for over 30 years throughout the outposts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Central America, and many more. His main contribution to the US defense system is the counter-terrorism strategy and disarming rebel groups in the Middle East. In 2012, he became the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the administration of former President Obama, but in 2014 he was suddenly forced into early retirement. General Flynn described these and the subsequent events in his book, The Field of Fight: How Can We Win the Global War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies? The reason for his earlier dismissal as the head of the NSA was his congressional report on the severe threat the United States was facing from the Islamic extremist groups, supported by their secular allies. The threat was supposed to be much more dangerous than the then administration was willing to admit. And, what is worse, the Western outposts and the targets of Islamic terrorism were regularly penetrated by enemies whose agents had previously been installed in specific establishments by their organizations. How did the enemy penetrate the US political and military structures? What is the motivation of an agent who signs up for the task of penetrating a foreign organization? What role does ideology play in this process? General Flynn attempted to bring those issues to light in front of the congressional representatives. Obama, however, did not want this fact to be known, nor preventive measures to be undertaken. The narrative of his administration constantly diminished the importance of terrorist activities and constantly sought to separate them from Islam itself. Flynn argued that the decision makers do not fully understand the enemy and their motivations, and without this understanding, America will not be able to defeat them. In his book, he laid out a full plan on how to achieve it. After his service termination, the general also founded the Flynn Intel Group, commercial, governmental, and international intelligence security and cyber firm, specializing in defense, diplomacy, and development initiatives. Shortly after winning the presidential election and swearing in, Donald Trump appointed General Flynn as Senior National Security Advisor in January 2017. But his term lasted less than a month due to rumors that Flynn had lied to Vice President Pence about his talks with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, during Obama's last months in office. Flynn was imputed to discuss with Kislyak the issue of sanctions imposed by Obama on Russia for alleged meddling in the presidential election. In short, Obama, supporting the candidacy of Hillary Clinton, his Secretary of State, released 35 Russian diplomats from their posts and announced other sanctions against Russian intelligence in retaliation for Trump's electoral victory. It was, however, an act of misdirection serving to support the narrative of Russian collusion. Further investigations showed that Russia had little, if anything, to do with swaying votes for Trump in the 2016 elections and did not contribute to Trump's victory. But let's return to Flynn. In April 2017, an investigation was initiated against the general on behalf of the Pentagon regarding possible acceptance of money from foreign governments without the required consent. Initially, in January 2017, Flynn denied the accusations during a hearing by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of discussing Obama's sanction on Russian intelligence in an interview with Kislyak. But in December 2017, he confessed to intentionally and knowingly lying during testimony before the FBI. In May 2018, the mysterious long-time FBI/CIA informant, it is not known which country he was a citizen of, noticed that Flynn, whom he met in December 2017 at an intelligence seminar in the British Security Bureau, maintained a dangerously close relationship with a certain Russian woman, suggesting that Flynn cooperated with Russian agents. The person who provided this information to the aforementioned US agencies was not, however, that informant, but a completely different person. Before the investigation began, on November 30, 2016, the US Department of Justice announced that it was opening proceedings to investigate the activities of Flynn's semi-commercial intelligence company and its allegedly illegal actions carried out at the request of the Turkish government and President Erdogan in 2016. It is interesting that this case was put on the docket just 2 weeks after Trump announced that he intended to appoint Flynn as an advisor in his new administration. Since the FBI could not find any evidence in this case, on January 4, 2017, it was ready to close it. However, at the last moment, it received a note from the infamous FBI agent Peter Strzok, who ordered to keep the case open, suggesting that he got such advice from the 7th floor, which is an euphemism for the FBI senior authority. I'm sure that at this point you have already noticed that this whole plot is as clear as mud, but I want to assure you that I did my best to explain the arguments of the prosecutors. Just a superficial look at those shows similarities to Trump's Russian collusion, the accusation that the current president won his chair thanks to Russian spies. Here, we also have an agent involved in the accusation, this time clearly characterized as a member of the British MI6. The so-called Steele dossier is his alleged 2016 report containing accusation against Trump's campaign of acting to the detriment of the country, conspiracy and cooperation with the Russian government. Trump's conversation with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, was as correct and did not indicate any kind of participation in the alleged crime as was Flynn's conversation with the Russian ambassador Kislyak. So, the persistent finger pointing at Russia, a country which I do not intend to defend myself, but similarly, I do not intend to accuse it of acts that it did not commit, as the main culprit in the 2016 election failure, as the leftists like to call it, smells of conspiracy theory. Especially if we consider the observations of General Flynn about the true modern enemy of America, that is, radical Islam and its allies. These observations were intentionally ignored by Obama, who, acting to Flynn's detriment, prematurely dismissed him from the military advisor's post and simultaneously deprived him of the right to full military retirement, I'm guessing. Obama did this to distract the army and politicians from the Middle East terrorists, slowly but efficiently infiltrating not only the US foreign facilities, but also the highest positions in the US government. Now, let me elaborate on the last one. Inspector General withdrew his lawsuit against Flynn on May 7th. New declassified evidence suggests that Michael Flynn fell victim to an intrigue by the FBI. James Comey, a former FBI director and a special investigative advisor, Robert Mueller, who was the FBI director before Comey, actively hid the evidence that General Flynn was innocent for almost 3 years. In January 2017, they conspired, literally, to target Flynn. What were the reasons? Destruction of Flynn, who, thanks to his many years of intelligence experience, has discovered that the US government had been infiltrated and penetrated by enemies, and up until 2017 acted against the American citizens who were forced to bear this treacherous administration. The second reason was the destruction of Trump's presidency, who had appointed Flynn as his advisor and who kept promising during his presidential campaign that he would finally destroy the so-called deep state. The most imminent example of his intentions was the 2016 TV debate, during which Trump told Hillary that if he were a president, she would be in jail. In December 2016, General Flynn had a completely legal and standards-compliant telephone conversation with Kislyak. This conversation was illegally recorded by the FBI because no intelligence agency is authorized to spy on its own citizens, and leaked to the press, and not by accident. The base on which FBI agents relied was the Logan Act, or the constitutionally dubious federal law passed in 1799, which states that unauthorized persons cannot negotiate with foreign governments. Flynn was not yet an official advisor to Trump at the time, but his conversation wasn't an attempt to negotiate. Still, it became an excuse for the FBI agents to informally talk about it with Flynn. This, of course, was a trap set by the FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, because he knew all too well that the informal nature of the interrogation would put Flynn in a defenseless position without a lawyer, and that was what McCabe actually insisted on. The agents started asking questions hoping that Flynn would lie. So this and the unfortunate Logan Act were literally all they had. However, as the declassified recordings from the interrogation show, Flynn reflected on his past conversations accurately. FBI made a whole bunch of mistakes trying to frame Flynn, including leaving behind a handwritten note from the FBI counterintelligence chief Bill Priestap, who asked in it, "What's our goal? True/admission? Or to get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired?" After the initial failure, namely Flynn was telling the truth and there was no legal basis for the prosecution, the FBI managed to persuade him to change his testimony. How? Under the threat of initiating an investigation against his son. General Flynn then gave in to the pressure and stated that his previous testimony to the FBI was a lie. At this point, he was already financially ruined by ongoing lawsuits to such extent that he had to sell his house. In addition, his first defender, the Covington and Burling law firm, together with the judge presiding over his case, hid the evidence of his innocence. Other actors involved were the FBI director, Comey, and the special investigator, Mueller. This was discovered only after Flynn changed his lawyer, so it was thanks to Sidney Powell and the fact that AG William Barr ordered a rehearing that the final confirmation of Flynn's entrapment was discovered. On May 7th this year, Mueller's investigation team abandoned the prosecution and the Ministry of Justice filed a motion to dismiss the case. But Judge Emmett G. Sullivan is delaying the formal closure of the case, for which there is no legal basis and which can set a dangerous precedent of violating defendants' constitutional rights. It is not in the judge's purview to insist on continuing an investigation after both sides, the prosecutor and the defendant likewise, pulled out of it. Delaying the closure harms the judge the most, because there will be consequences for this kind of conduct. Therefore, there is a suspicion that Judge Sullivan may be under pressure from third parties. Evidence acquitting Flynn also implies the guilt of a whole bunch of other people involved in setting the trap. This includes former FBI Director James Comey, former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, former head of the Counterintelligence Section Peter Strzok, and John Brennan, the former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Sources like James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence, and Sally Yates, former United States Deputy Prosecutor, and her conversations records also point to the involvement of former President Obama. That's why Trump posted a prominent post on Twitter quite a few times already with the hashtag ObamaGate, which obviously is a comparison to the famous Watergate scandal from the 70s, in which President Nixon was involved. According to Clapper, Obama was the originator of the report on Russian interference in 2016 elections, and he knew the details of Flynn case well. Not only that, Christopher Steele, the author of the famous Steele dossier, testified recently to a British court that he believes that the person who commissioned his report was Hillary Clinton. Not directly, of course, but through the GPS fusion company which was employed by the Democratic National Committee law firm, Perkins Coie. The then National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, was also mentioned in this context. The irony of the matter is that it was the Russian bankers who turned out to be the proverbial nail in the plotter's coffin, because they sued Steele for placing them in the report as suspects in a fictitious Russian interference in the 2016 elections. Similarly, a knife in Hillary Clinton's bag was put there by her presidential campaign's director, who is also involved in a much more sinister case, named after the most famous Italian dish, namely John Podesta. Podesta testified before the US Congressional Commission that Hillary was one of the main people involved in the illegal espionage already in December 2017. The conservative American charity organization Turning Point USA has already petitioned Attorney General William Barr to initiate proceedings regarding the corruption in the Ministry of Justice during the Obama presidency, and to investigate all the participants of the politically motivated campaign against General Flynn. Potential allegations include obstruction of the investigation, perjury, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, deprivation of civil rights under disguise of law or abuse of power regarding the Flynn's case, and alleged Russian interference in Trump's election. And the cherry on top, the crime of lying in connection with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, also known as FISA, associated with illegal espionage and thus treason. And this is why, right now, not only the independent, but also the mainstream media recount the whole scandal, pointing to Obama being a traitor. Let's move on to further news. US Treasury Secretary Robert Mnuchin predicts the reopening of the US economy and most states by the end of August. In contrast, Los Angeles shutdown will be extended for another 3 months, as was announced by the District Director for Public Health, Barbara Ferrer. By the way, her very unflattering pictures already made some rounds on social media. She just looks totally pale and unhealthy. However, it is the governor of Connecticut who has beaten everyone in covert ruling, announcing that the decision about closing or reopening the state will be made by his secret task force, violating all the principles of transparency of similar government gatherings. Then there is the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, who, clearly in an act of powerlessness, calls for a public humiliation and mocking of people who do not comply with the recommendations. And I remind you, those are recommendations and not orders of wearing masks. All this is expected to raise further civilian protests. As a side note, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg ruled that the protests against the state's closure are disinformation, and announced that Facebook will ban on their platform any attempts by the citizens to organize for this purpose. Already at the request of the state authorities, Facebook pages informing about planned protests in California, New Jersey, and Nebraska were removed. Further, Republicans from Michigan sued their Democratic governor after she extended the closure to May 28th, calling her attitude an attempt to usurp power, and her decision illegal, absurd, unconstitutional, and senseless. The lawsuit was filed after a large group of protesters appeared in front of the state administration building in full combat gear, including AR-15 shotguns, to demonstrate against the tyranny of the government. By the way, Facebook was sued as well and will pay a total of $52 million in damages after reaching a class action settlement on May 12 for causing in over 11,000 past and present moderators post-traumatic stress disorder, yes, you heard that correctly, PTSD. and also other mental illnesses. Moderators, each of whom will receive at least $1,000, approved or rejected drastic content on the platform, as well as photos and videos full of violence. Let me just add a few words of commentary. Zuckerberg is an idiot. The American police, fire brigade, and public safety organizations in 22 states have deployed drones that will help with monitoring human behavior during the pandemic, including correcting it. Drones come from various countries, such as China and Canada. In Connecticut, this project was discontinued after only 2 days due to protests. The governor of New York has ordered coronavirus-infected patients to be admitted to nursing homes and similar facilities for adults. Some patients were sent there with body bags. I'm guessing Cuomo's murderous instincts overpowered his self-preservation instinct. As a retort, the curator of one of the nursing homes in Long Island, whose mother is a resident there, initiated a resolution calling for a federal investigation into the matter. Inclinations similar to Cuomo's were also demonstrated by the Pennsylvania Department of Health. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, came up with the idea of microchipping children returning to school and kindergartens after reopening the country to monitor and enforce the so-called social distancing. Cybernetics specialists have expressed their criticism, arguing that it poses a potential threat to children from any pedophile who knows a bit about hacking, that is, breaking into computer networks. It is interesting that Netanyahu emphasized that he wants to place such microchips in children in the first place. A case of an Australian mother brutally arrested by the police for protesting and breaking the rules of social distancing made it to the headlines. It all happened in the presence of her screaming, terrified child, who was pulled from her arms by several officers. Similar cases have also occurred in the USA. A Washington police officer who publicly urged his colleagues not to violate the constitutional rights of citizens and not to enforce the rules of social distancing was sent on an administrative leave. So far, his supporters have managed to collect for him funds in the amount of $226,000 through the GoFundMe website. The most spectacular achievement, however, was the speech given by a veteran of the US Army, a former Marine, to a crowd of police officers ready to stop the protesters in California by all means, brute force included. The police listened to him and left. Miracles really do happen in America. Missouri is the first state to file a lawsuit against the Chinese Communist Party for concealing information related to the coronavirus epidemic that caused a lot of human suffering, deaths, and irreversible economic losses, etc., in the state and around the world. The financial director of the state of Florida sent a letter to the Chinese authorities demanding financial reparations for the losses caused by them and the virus. According to the recent data, unemployment in the US reached 15.5%, and official applications for support exceeded the number of 33 million. This, however, does not stop the largest advocates of continued restrictions and the country's shutdown from pushing for extending the unconstitutional rulings. 200 celebrities and scientists, including Nobel laureates from around the world, have issued an open letter or call to arms published in the French Le Monde, in which they argue that unrestrained consumerism and a lack of care for the environment will lead to the destruction of the planet, and that it is necessary to revise the value system of humanity as well as to deeply transform global economies. In their view, global economic recession is systemic in nature. The one we are just experiencing wasn't caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The current epidemic only accentuated it. This attempt at stopping the meta-crisis, as they call it, was headed by the French actress Juliette Binoche. She was joined by the Hollywood actors and other celebrities, such as Madonna, Robert De Niro, Jane Fonda, Kate Blanchett, Monica Bellucci, and even Adam Driver. the Aurora Borealis of the fading Star Wars series, which was, by the way, ruined by the incorporation of the leftist social justice warrior fake archetype into their movies. Of course, social justice warriors have exactly as much in common with social justice as Antifa has with anti-fascism. Those who signed the letter anticipate a second wave of the epidemic in the autumn. Do not expect, however, to catch a breath between the two waves, because the state of Washington on the northwest coast is already fighting deadly hornets from Asia. And it is still unknown how they came into the United States. And also gypsy moths, which pose a serious threat to trees and, in consequence, to agriculture. The politically incorrect moth is available in two versions, the original Asian one and also the Asian-European hybrid. So you can pick and choose. Its common name explains its true origin better than a dozen of scientific papers by Nobel Prize winners could have ever done. Meanwhile, former New York mayor and lawyer Rudy Giuliani revealed that the World Health Organization supporter, Dr. Fauci, in 2015 donated a $3.7 million grant to the Wuhan lab, from which the coronavirus later leaked. What's more, the old studies from 2005 have just been scooped out and now are proof showing that Fauci and the NIH knew very well that chloroquine is an effective anti-SARS virus, of which the coronavirus is a variation called SARS-CoV-2. The NIH has conducted a comprehensive research into chloroquine, concluding that it works both as a medicine and also as a vaccine. So why hide these facts in 2020 and fiercely fight Trump, who pointed to this drug at the very beginning of the pandemic? All this indicates that the motivation of Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, the White House physicians leading the counter-pandemic strategy, was to push the closure of the US economy and thereby ruin it. It also, of course, clears the way for the development of a vaccine which would be provided to everybody around the world without discrimination by Bill Gates. As RFK Jr. revealed, part of the profits from the Gates Foundation vaccines sale had been contracted by the National Institute of Health, chaired by Dr. Fauci. What's even more interesting, guidelines for closing the country were given by the WHO. Finally, everything makes sense. All of this must have been the reason why the American conservative group of activists, Judicial Watch, brought a case to court demanding a disclosure of the communication between Fauci and WHO directors, including its president, Dr. Tedros, and the communication between the WHO and China between January 1st and April 1st, 2020. All this in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. Ironically, Fauci has just been subjected to a modified quarantine after he came in contact with another White House employee who had previously been tested for a virus and received a positive result. Fauci will be tested daily. So far, his results have been negative. Additionally, 11 Secret Service agents surrounding President Trump are now strictly monitored, including Vice President Mike Pence. Many of them have already tested positive. Pence received a negative result and is not subject to quarantine. While Dr. Fauci was conducting his secret operation in the US, his good friend Bill Gates wasn't idle. He offered the Nigerian House of Representatives a $10 million bribe to push the vaccine bill through the Congress, bypassing the usual procedures. Luckily, the coalition of the United Political Parties learned about the attempt in advance and warned Nigerians before the law was enforced. Gates had also announced support for the Earth Now project back in 2018, which aimed to launch 500 satellites into Earth's orbit in order to constantly monitor the global situation. Meanwhile, in Russia, another doctor treating patients with coronavirus fell out of the window. By himself, without anyone's help. The last victim of those unfortunate occurrences is still alive, but the two others have already died. These doctors complained on social media that despite the fact that they contracted the virus, the hospital management kept forcing them to continue to work. They also revealed that the hospitals lacked the appropriate equipment. A doctor from New York who got infected with the virus and then recovered officially committed a suicide, but only after she resumed her work. At the time of her death, however, she was in Virginia at her family home. It was her parents who confirmed this version of events. And finally, in Pennsylvania, a coronavirus researcher with Chinese roots was found dead with bullets in his head, neck, and chest. He was reportedly close to a groundbreaking discovery. Another man, considered the victim's friend, was found dead shortly after. So according to the official version, it was him who supposedly shot the researcher and then committed suicide. This is not the end of the healthcare system controversies. The FBI is currently raiding hospitals like the one in Michigan where doctors used intravenous infusions of vitamin C on coronavirus patients with great results. The FBI did not act on their own, but formed a task force with the Department of Health and Social Services. It happened about a month after the CIA confidently warned its employees against taking hydroxychloroquine, which was allegedly causing a number of undesirable side effects, including death. At the exact same time, President Trump called a press conference to which he invited people who used hydroxychloroquine after they had contracted the virus. The results were positive in 100% of the cases and occurred in just a few days' span after the beginning of the treatment. During the conference, Trump emphasized that he had not personally encountered a case in which this drug would harm anyone or cause any side effects whatsoever. The recovery team pointed out that HCQ is not only a great cure for COVID or malaria, but it is also surprisingly effective with lupus or Lyme disease. A few days later, President Trump caused another scandal. During the daily press briefing on pandemic, namely, he announced that the new research from the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center in Maryland indicates that ultraviolet radiation, including sunlight, kills the virus. Earlier in March, at a meeting with representatives of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Trump explained that ultraviolet-based technology and ozone therapy were discovered long ago by Nikola Tesla. Young Donald came across this information very early on because of his uncle, John G. Trump, a lecturer at MIT who took care of Tesla's work after the genius scientist died. Some may remember that a few weeks prior to this, Trump hinted that the coronavirus should be gone by the summer. Now we know why he said it. However, mainstream media went above and beyond per usual and accused the president of promoting bleach as a remedy for the coronavirus. I know, it's hard to make up a story like that. The pandemic is becoming more and more dangerous. Researchers have just discovered that domestic cats are susceptible to catching the virus from people as well as from each other. There is still no strong evidence that cats can infect humans. The idea of examining furry friends was born after the virus presence was discovered in a cat from Belgium. Soon, 2 other infected cats were found, this time in the US. As if this was not enough, it was discovered that lions and tigers at the Bronx Zoo became infected with the coronavirus, which they got from humans. How was that established? The sources don't explain. Research was carried out by several Japanese scientists and a professor from the University of Madison, Wisconsin, with a telling name, Peter Halfman, which is Peter half man or half human, or something between those lines. Interestingly, the research was funded by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease under the influence of Fauci. Due to the particular susceptibility of cats to infection, scientists propose to enforce the principles of social distancing on them. I don't know, should we call it kitty distancing? Meowy distancing? Pussy distancing. Either way, good luck with that. Twitter yet again provided some juicy bits of information. We can always count on that. Several users posted tweets from the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony. What can we detect in those shocking pictures and videos? Hospital scenes with dancing nurses, similar to the post from the current epidemic in which bored and idle hospital staff dance and pose for pictures in their weirdest arrangements, such as the one where they impersonate Jesus and the 12 apostles during the Last Supper. In the next scene of the Olympic ceremony, we see children on hospital beds being attacked by black-clad demons in the middle of the night. And also, we can hear the music from the movie The Exorcist in the background. One of the children is lifted together with the bed, which I guess is a reference to demonic possession, towards the Grim Reaper, that is the personification of death, towering over it all. Finally, the camera shot from above shows a layout of a massive circle with spikes, which, completely accidentally of course, happens to look exactly like a representation of a single copy of the coronavirus specimen shown to us by the media and the medical VIPs. One can also spot some steel towers scattered around the stage, a sight unusual for 2012, but in 2020 they look strikingly similar to 5G antennas. An equally shocking scene is the one in which a pretty disgusting caricature of Boris Johnson rises from a hospital bed. As we now know, Boris has been subjected to the coronavirus tests a few weeks back, which came back positive. He was displaying some mild symptoms for several days and was later discharged from hospital. Interestingly, describing the atmosphere of the 2012 Olympics, Johnson, the then mayor of London, said that the excitement caused by the game spreads like a mild virus. Of course, that gave a lot of food for thought to all the specialists in the field of conspiracy theories, which today is probably around every third person on the planet, and the trend is still growing. So they point here to the phenomenon of so-called predictive programming. Alan Watt, who coined the term, defines it as the power of suggestion using the media of fiction to create the desired outcome. To elaborate further, things or ideas which would otherwise be seen as bizarre, vulgar, undesirable, or impossible are inserted into films in the realm of fantasy. When the viewer watches these films, his or her mind is left open to suggestion, and the conditioning process begins. These same movies, which are designed to program the average person, can give the discerning viewer a better understanding of the workings and the plan of the world agenda. So, because rational thinking and criticism are suspended, hey, it's just a movie, the suggestion nestles into our subconscious. And if something has been sown in our stored consciousness, especially under the influence of strong emotions, as it often happens while observing artistic performances, for example, art, movies, theater, music, etc., then our mind is conditioned to acknowledge it as undeniable. The phenomenon engraving itself in the subconsciousness becomes an absolute truth by the mere fact of its existence. Since it got a bit gloomy toward the end, I will round it up on a positive note. While the governors of the democratic states imposed on their electorate the obligation to close businesses and abolish social life, violating the fundamental constitutional rights of Americans, and even went as far as to encourage reporting on fellow citizens who stood up for inalienable human freedoms and ignored some of the ridiculous orders, there were 5 governors who did not impose the shutdown in their respective states. These governors are Republican, and the 5 states are Wyoming, Nebraska, Arkansas, Iowa, and Missouri. The residents describe themselves as tough, smart, resilient, and having a commonsensical approach. Now, they want to lead the country's return to normalcy and rebuilding the economy. My congratulations. On Friday, May 15th, President Trump unveiled the official flag of the newest sixth military branch, Space Force, enacted on December 20, 2019. Trump explained that airspace is the future of both offensive and defensive actions, that is, against the US enemies, including Russia and China, and that the US has been the leader in this field for a long time now. The President also revealed that the American forces are in possession of an extraordinary missile that moves, attention, 17 times faster than others. And a curious thing, the Space Force flag resembles the United Federation of Planet flag from the iconic Star Trek series. That's all for today's recap of the most important happenings in the USA and around the world. Thanks for tuning in. Be best.